Looking for some new Core Set 2021 cards? Well, you can get them from our sponsor, Card Kingdom. Card Kingdom has Core Set 2021 up for pre-sale now, and you can check it out over at cardkingdom.com. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Core Set 2021 spoilers. And I know we're getting close to the end of Core Set 2021 spoilers. I think Monday is the last day, but then we jump right into Jumpstart, so we're not done with spoiler season yet, not even close. But even though we're getting close to the end of Core Set 2021 spoilers, we still have some sweet cards to talk about today, which means we should probably jump right into it. Start talking about new Magic cards. So first up today, we have Terror of the Peaks. So Terror of the Peaks, red Mythic Dragon, 5 mana, 5/4 flying, spells your opponent's cast at target Terror of the Peaks, costs an additional 3 life to cast, and then whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. So Terror of the Peaks reminds me of a few different cards. Easiest callback, Pandemonium, Warstorm Surge, kind of the updated version of it. It's literally Warstorm Surge, except in creature mode on a dragon. Also sub-similarities to Scourge of Velkis, which only triggers on dragons, but has a similar ability when a dragon comes into play. So Terror of the Peaks, it's a pretty interesting card. The first thing I thought of was, this is a commander staple. If you look back at the comparisons, like Warstorm Surge, for example, Scourge of Velkis, these are cards that see pretty heavy play in commander. In fact, Warstorm Surge, I would consider it a staple of red decks in commander. It shows up in primarily decks that have commanders that put creatures into play. Norin's kind of a weird one because it itself goes in and out of play, but like Ilharg puts big creatures into play. Velduk makes a bunch of tokens every turn. Omnath makes a bunch of tokens. Something like Terror of the Peaks gives you the ability to deal a bunch of extra damage, shoot down creatures, go face as your creatures are coming into play from your commander. The cool thing about Terror of the Peaks is it has some additional upside because it's going to be great in dragon decks. If you go back to Scourge of Velkis, that's a card that shows up in most dragon decks. It's just a really solid dragon. In Terror of the Peaks, it does the same thing. Obviously, it's not limited to dragons, which is why it can show up in all those other decks we were talking about as well, but in a dragon deck, it's another Scourge of Velkis, and that's a dragon you want basically 100% of the time. So Lathlis, Zillirin, the Ur-Dragon, Kithis, Bladewig, Scion of the Ur-Dragon, Karthus, Bladewig, Scion of the Ur-Dragon, you name a dragon commander, you're probably going to want Terror of the Peaks in your deck if you're playing Dragon Tribal. So as far as commander is concerned, this card is great. It's going to see play in dragon decks. It's going to see play outside of dragon decks as a Warstorm Surge on a body. It is just a great commander card. On the other hand, in other formats, like Standard and so forth, I'm not sure how I feel about this card. Terror of the Peaks is a card that I want to be good. I desperately want it to be good. If Terror of Peaks is good in Standard, that's a pretty good sign that Standard is in a good place. It's similar to Baneslayer Angel. Back in M10 era, when Baneslayer came out, which is a long time ago now, it was one of the best creatures in Standard. It was revolutionary. It was great. But now that Baneslayer's been reprinted in Core Set 2020, is it even going to be good? I'm not sure. We're in a Standard where we have Brazen Borrowers, and Teferis, and Elspeth Conquers Deaths, and Grasp of Darkness, and basically any creature, we talked about this with Baneslayer in specific, and the Green Mythic from Core Set 2021, but basically any creature that costs more than 4 mana, or even 4 mana, and doesn't do anything immediately, they just don't see play in Standard anymore. That's just not how Standard works. So even though Terror, it seems insane, like you play it, you untap with it, it does crazy things, it shoot down the board, it gets it in the air, I just don't know if it can see play in Standard. On the other hand, there are some shenanigans. I should add a little qualifier here. When I say I don't think see play in Standard, I mean, I don't think it could see much play fairly in Standard. Maybe as a sideboard card, maybe a little bit, but really, fairly I don't like it. On the other hand, the card has some cool, like, pseudo-combo potential. Like, let's say you get Terror of the Peaks on the battlefield or in your graveyard. You command the Dreadhorde, get back a whole bunch of creatures at once. Those creatures are immediately going to trigger Terror of the Peaks and maybe just kill your opponent with direct damage. Like, reanimate a bunch of, I don't know, rotting Regisars. It only takes 3 of them, and your opponent's going to die with damage directly directly to the face. So reanimation style combo decks, I think, could be a cool home for Terror of the Peaks. In older formats, it's a great Dragonstorm card. You get Terror of the Peaks along with some other big dragons. You ping your opponent to death. Another possible home is Dragon style decks. If you go back to Modern and Pioneer, we've had some success in the not super distant past with just like Sarkhan / Dragon Horde / Rampant Dragons, maybe play a Blood Moon or two. Terror of the Peaks seems great in that style of deck as well. So even though I think Terror of the Peaks is not going to be, sadly, a great fair card in Standard, that's just unfortunately not how Standard works these days. 5 mana threats that you need to untap with are just not typically very good anymore. I do think there's cool shenanigans. Commander staple, almost for sure. It's going to show up in a ton of Commander decks. And if you're willing to play it unfairly, reanimating a bunch of creatures, Dragonstorming, or Dragon Tribal, then Terror of the Peaks is a very legitimate card. It does not take too many big creatures coming into play to just snipe your opponent out of the game with those big dragons burning your opponent with direct damage. So I think Terror of the Peaks, I love the card. It looks like it should be powerful. Standard, fingers crossed. I'm praying to the Magic gods that it'll be good, because if Terror of Peaks is good, along with stuff like Baneslayer, then Standard is going to be amazing. But I've mostly resigned myself to trying to play Terror of the Peaks unfairly and jamming it in a ton of Commander decks where it should be spectacular. We also got a little 1-drop, Speaker of the Heavens. So a 1-mana 1/1 human cleric. It has vigilance, it has lifelink, and you can tap it to make a 4/4 angel. That's right, a 1-drop that taps to make an angel. The only drawback is you gotta have at least 7 more life than your starting life total, and you can only do it as a sorcery. So this means you have to be in Standard, Modern, whatever, Pioneer, Historic. You gotta have at least 27 life. In Commander, you gotta have 47 life, but that doesn't seem that hard to get to. So I think comparison-wise, Speaker of the Heavens, to me, reminds me of a cross between Serra Ascendant as a payoff 1-drop for white decks. Obviously, it's a little bit different. Serra Ascendant itself gets big if you get to 30 life. Speaker of the Heavens just makes a bunch of big creatures if you get to 30 or even just 27 life. The other comparison is Dragon Master Outcast is a 1-drop that starts off not doing much, but then as the game goes along, if you can meet its condition, it starts just pouring out big creatures every single turn. Like, once you get to 27 life and you're Speaker of the Heavensing every single turn, you're going to take over the game with angels really, really quickly. Of course, your life total, a little bit harder to get to than lands. Like, lands you'll hit naturally. Your life total can be attacked by your opponent, but still, in a life gain style deck, which we have a lot of support for in Standard. We have a Johnny's Pridemate. We have a Johnny's Strength of the Pride. We have Heliod Suncrown. We have a lot of life gain cards. It's pretty easy to get up to 27 life in a deck like that. And then Speaker of the Heavens is going to be absurd. Just a 4/4 angel every single turn. And I think maybe you can get there in a value style deck, although it's probably less likely to show up in a deck like this. But we have like Elite Guard Mages, Charming Princes, Uros. These are cards that are good on their own and just happen to gain 3 life. So if you can play a few of these and not take damage over the course of the game, eventually be to the point where Speaker of the Heavens will be turned on to doing spectacular things. The other place to talk about this card is in older formats, especially Modern, also Historic, but in Modern in specific, there's decks like Martyr Proc. Martyr of Sands, it gains tons of life. Like, a single Martyr of Sands will get you enough life to turn on your Speaker of the Heavens, and then the Martyr of Sands deck are also built around Proclamation of Rebirth to reanimate 1-mana creatures, mostly Martyr of Sands, but that's a way you can keep getting back Speaker of the Heavens if it dies. So in a deck like Martyr Proc, Speaker of the Heavens seems like a great backup. Serra Ascendant is one of your finishers. Just make 4/4 angels and win the game. There's also combo potential here if you can meet the 27 life clause. Get a Speaker of the Heavens out and have Intruder Alarm. You just go infinite. You make infinite 4/4 angels. You tap your Speaker of the Heavens. It'll make a 4/4 that'll trigger Intruder Alarm to untap all creatures. So you untap Speaker of the Heavens, then you tap it again to make a 4/4. That will trigger Intruder Alarm to untap all your creatures, so you can tap it again to make a 4/4. So infinite 4/4 combo potential. Could do it in Modern, definitely Commander decks as well. And then speaking of Commander decks, I think there's some obvious homes for Speaker of the Heavens there too. There are dedicated life gain style Commander decks. Linden, for example, Karlov's all about life gain, Heliod's all about life gain. If you're playing a life gain deck in Commander, it's just an auto include. It's going to be great in those decks. No reason not to play it. Definitely one of the best 99 cards you can play with any of these commanders. So Speaker of the Heavens, I really like this card. I think it has standard potential. I think it has modern potential. It definitely has commander potential, although I will give a word of warning. What I think you do not want to do with this card, Speaker of the Heavens, is to play a bunch of bad life gain cards to make it work. That's what you want to avoid. I don't think you want to be like, I'm going to play Speaker of the Heavens and a whole bunch of revitalizes and a whole bunch of, I don't know, healing salves or whatever, and just try to like turbo life gain and win with 4/4s. I think you either need to be a life gain creature deck, like we were talking about, like Heliod and a Johnny's Pridemates and a Johnny's, or you have to just have incidental life gain to turn it on, rather than janky bad life gain spells to try to rush to 27 as quickly as possible. That seems like a recipe of disaster, but if you're playing a deck that naturally gets to 27 life, in Standard, in Modern, in Commander, I guess it would be 47 life, Speaker of the Heavens is going to be one of the best 1-drops you can possibly play in any of those decks. We also got, speaking of life gain, a little uncommon life gain spell, Silvermote Ghoul. So Silvermote Ghoul, 3 mana, 3/1. It has an ability where at the start of your end step, if you gain 3 or more life this turn, you can return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped, and then you can pay to sacrifice it to draw a card. So if you are gaining life consistently every turn, this is a steady source of card advantage. You sack it, you draw a card, it comes back into play for free. So it kind of combos with itself. It also has some easy combo pieces in Standard, like Uro. Gains 3 life. That's enough to get back Silvermote Ghoul. Maybe we can play some sort of like Uro graveyard Cavalier deck where you're stocking your graveyard with Tamios and Cavaliers, getting Silvermotes in there, playing an Uro, getting them all back for free. Sounds like a lot of free value. Creeping Chill happens to be 3 life, so maybe some sort of standard dredge deck. Tebrate Calls the Dead can gain you life and fill your graveyard. So there are ways to make this work. Also, 3 life happens to be what you could get from a food token. So if you're playing some sort of black sacrifice-based deck, with Cauldron Familiars and Witch's Oven, any food token you sack is going to get back your Silvermote, and then you can also like generate card advantage by sacrificing it, do some sacrifice shenanigans and combos by like sacrificing Silvermote to get the food token you need to get it back from the graveyard. So there's all kinds of synergies you can pull off with Silvermote Ghoul. So while this is not a blood artist, it's not just a super aggressive coming back for basically free type card in a deck that can gain a bunch of life, this is a really powerful effect. Things that come back from the graveyard for free are almost always very good. We've seen that time and time again. Arclight Phoenixes, Blood Gas, Prized Amalgams, anything that you don't need to spend mana and can come back from the graveyard, those cards tend to be really good. I expect someone will figure out a way to make Silvermote Ghoul very good as well, even though I think it is a little bit harder than some of those other cards, because life gain is a little bit weirder than casting spells or making a land drop, but still, if it comes back from the graveyard for free, it's going to be good. If not in Standard, then in older formats. So I have very high hopes that someone's going to break Silvermote Ghoul at some point. Next on our list, we got another rare land in Animal Sanctuary. So colorless land comes into play untapped. You can pay to tap it, put a +1/+1 counter on target bird, cat, dog, goat, ox, or snake. So 6 different creature types. The problem with Animal Sanctuary, I think it's twofold. The biggest is the tribes that it supports, birds, cats, dogs, goats, ox, snakes, are not the most powerful tribes. Cats have been improving. Dogs just became a thing. Birds, goats, ox, snakes, definitely not tribes that show up on tournament tables by any stretch. Some of them show up in janky commander decks, but that's about it. So Animal Sanctuary has potential to be powerful, but it is very limited by the tribes that can support it. Even if you just look at Standard, there might be a cat deck or a dog deck, probably not top tier, but they could exist. There's enough cards. Birds, there's not a dedicated tribal deck. Oxen, I think there's 3, and you're looking at like yoked ox style creatures, which you're never going to win with those. Stone Coil Serpent is technically a snake, but snakes aren't a tribe. I believe that the only goat in all of Standard is Torwild Caprador, so there's just not a lot of support for Animal Sanctuary tribes. More disappointingly, the card is really expensive. If you look at other lands that can put counters on things, Gavany Township is essentially 5 mana, and remember that with Animal Sanctuary as well. It's 2 mana, but you also tap a land, so it's kind of 1 additional mana. So Gavany Township is essentially 5 mana, counter on all your creatures. Orin Reef the Vastwood comes into play tapped, does add colored mana, but it can tap to put a counter on each green creature that entered the battlefield this turn. Even Guild Mage's Forum, it's essentially 1 mana, taxed, and whenever you cast a multicolored creature spell, it comes into play with an extra counter. So compared to other similar lands, Animal Sanctuary is more expensive for what it does. It's only putting a counter on one creature. It is doing it for a big chunk of mana, and those tribes are not especially competitive on their own. So sadly, I'm pretty disappointed in Animal Sanctuary. I love the idea of the card, but I feel like the combination of supporting weak tribes and only putting a single counter on a single creature. If it was pay to tap it, put a counter on each bird, cat, dog, goat, or snake or ox that you control, then I might be on board. But as it is, I'm honestly not sure if I would put this in like a cat commander deck, for example. I definitely don't think it's going to break standard by any stretch. Not going to show up in modern or anything like that. But I'm not even sure if it's worth a slot in a deck like a Rabo commander, for example, or a dog commander deck. I don't even know if it does enough for that, which is really, really sad. So cool card. I love the idea of the card. Just doesn't feel powerful enough to me to really see play anywhere, unless you just play it because it's cute and you like its flavor. But as far as being good, I think it's just too expensive and lacking in power. As far as lower rarity cards, we usually don't talk about all of them, but when there's a good one and an important one, we talk about it individually, which means we gotta say that Colossal Dreadmaw has made its return to standard. At this point, it's just a meme, Colossal Dreadmaw showing up, but the 6-mana 6/6 trample, probably going to get you in limited at some point. We also got Griffin Aerie, and this card's pretty sweet. 2 mana enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, if you gain 3 or more life this turn, so similar to some of the other cards we've talked about, you get a 2/2 white Griffin creature token with flying. This, to me, feels like the white life gain Bitter Blossom. You're actually getting a better token than Bitter Blossom. A 2/2 flyer is pretty excellent. So I think this card has a chance. If you're playing the mono white life gain deck, you're going to incidentally be gaining 3 life most turns, which means you're just going to be getting free 2/2s, and they do stack up. So if you have 4 Griffin Aeries, you're getting 4 Griffins. So I think Griffin Aerie has a shot to show up in life gain decks, in standard, in commander, potentially as well. Super sweet Bitter Blossom-esque enchantment with a life gain twist thrown in. Next on our list, we have what might be the most important reprint for standard in the entire set. Well, maybe that's not true. Ugin is pretty scary to me, and I'm excited for Containment Priest, but Scavenging Ooze makes its return in M21, and I think this is a absolutely huge deal. So, you know what the card does? 2 mana 2/2, you can pay a green, exile a card from a graveyard. If it's a creature, you get a +1/+1 counter on Ooze, and you gain a life. But it doesn't have to be a creature. You can exile any card from the graveyard. So essentially, the power of Scavenging Ooze is it's an already decent 2-drop. 2/2 for 2 isn't exciting, but it quickly grows, and if you look at standard right now, a ton of the best decks in the format are either built around the graveyard or at least using the graveyard. So I'm talking about Uros, Cauldron Familiars, even like aggro decks, but we'll get to those in a minute. So if you look at just the top tier of the meta, tier 1, Team of Reclamation, Sacrifice. Team of Reclamation, it's a Uro deck coming back from the graveyard. Jump Sacrifice, all about looping Cauldron Familiars in and out of the graveyard. Sultai Midrange, it's an Uro deck. Rakdos Lurrus, that's like a double graveyard deck. You got Lurrus for the graveyard as well as Cauldron Familiar. And then the next tier is kind of like red or Gruul-based aggro decks. And those decks, even though they aren't about the graveyard, Scavenging Ooze as a main deckable life gain spell where you can just play it and exile a few cards is very powerful. It shows up as a sideboard card against decks like Burn even in Modern just because the life gain is good. So Scavenging Ooze does something relevant against basically all the top tier decks of the meta. Sniping Uros, Cauldron Familiars, gaining life against aggro, and as you move further through the standard metagame, you got like the cycling deck. You can exile the cycling cards from the graveyard to power down Zenith Flare. Croxus shows up. Elspeth Conqueror's Death, still a good card even without the reanimation, but that reanimation of a planeswalker or creature really puts it over the top. Scavenging Ooze, for 1 mana, can snipe that Teferi or Narset or Dream Trawler that's going to come back. Lurrus decks playing things from the graveyard, so Scavenging Ooze lines up incredibly well with the standard meta. Also hyped for this one in Historic. The Historic meta, a little bit harder to figure out outside of just like playing it because we don't have a ton of tournaments, but on Burial Rites, the reanimation deck was just put into the format. Aggro is heavily played. Uro shows up a lot. So Scavenging Ooze, we know what it does in Modern. We know what it can do in older formats, but I think this card is a massive, massive deal, both for Standard and for Historic. Also like a reasonable rare to open. It's like $5 or $6, I think, in paper. So not super high value like Uro or Grim Tutor, but it is a decent rare to open, and it's going to be really powerful. So super awesome reprint coming soon in core set 2021. We also got Hooded Blightfang, a cool Deathtouch lord, I guess. It's not a lord in the sense that it doesn't pump our creatures, but it is a payoff for playing a bunch of Deathtouch creatures. So 4 mana, you get a 1/4 with Deathtouch. Whenever a creature you control with Deathtouch attacks, each opponent loses a life, and you gain a life, and then whenever a creature you control with Deathtouch deals damage to a Planeswalker, destroy that Planeswalker. So all of your Deathtouch creatures now have Deathtouch for Planeswalkers as well. So Hooded Blightfang, first thing I thought of is, oh, it's kind of like a Deathtouch Hellrider. Hellrider used to be very good. Of course, Hooded Blightfang, not as aggressive. It's not a 3/3 for 4. It doesn't have face, but that drain your opponent out when you attack ability is really nice. The other reason I'm excited for Hooded Blightfang is we recently played a Deathtouch Porcuparrot deck, which was oddly effective. Like, you just put Porcuparrot on a Deathtouch creature, snipe down all your opponent's things, and eventually go at your opponent's face. Hooded Blightfang seems like the perfect addition as a backup payoff for when we don't have Porcuparrot, and works well with Porcuparrot, mutating onto it to snipe things down, so gonna be sweet in that deck as well. Otherwise, if you look at the Deathtouch stuff that we have in Standard, Faraska Swarm's Eminence, for the next few months at least till rotation, gives us another Deathtouch payoff, growing our Deathtouch creatures when they deal damage, so maybe we can play full-on Deathtouch Tribal. There are some decent Deathtouch creatures, especially in black, but also a little bit in green, Foulmire Knights and Chevelles and Questing Beasts, so I'm hopeful that Hooded Blightfang, worst case, janky part of the Porcuparrot deck, which is a really cool, unique deck that is surprisingly powerful. Best case, maybe Deathtouch Tribal can actually develop, and if it does, Hooded Blightfang is going to be a big part of it. And worth mentioning, this thing just blocks for days. Against like mono red, you just slam this on turn 3, it's going to kill essentially all their creatures, kills any creature thanks to Deathtouch, but it's going to just stonewall aggro decks if they're going to try to attack you, and then eventually you can get in some damage, start draining your opponent. So even though it's a 1/4, it's kind of a 2/4, because when you attack, you get to drain your opponent for 1 and you gain the life. So Hooded Blightfang, I think this card's actually super sweet. Excited to see if Deathtouch Tribal or Porcuparrot Deathtouch Tribal can develop, and just as a standalone card with some incidental Deathtouch cards like a Questing Beast or a Chevelle and some sort of Golgari mid-range deck, I think it could be very sweet. We also got Palladium Myr, which I just wanted to mention this one briefly because it's a card that people get hyped about. You see the Soul Ring text, tapping to add 2 generic mana, and it feels like it should be powerful, but traditionally Palladium Myr has been between fringe and unplayable when it's been in Standard. It does show up in some Commander decks, so don't expect it to be a top-tier Standard card, doubly so right now in our current Standard, when you have so many insane ramp spells. Uros and Growth Spirals and Azusas and Cultivates, like the list of things that ramps is really powerful. And remember, most of those cards ramp in a way that can't die. The problem with Palladium Myr, it's obviously powerful if you untap with it, but you gotta play it, you gotta wait a turn, then you start adding mana. When you have options that don't need to wait a turn, and put a land into play, or immediately you play extra land drops, or tutor a land like Cultivate directly on the battlefield, it's really hard for cards like this to see play. So, a fun reprint, I like Palladium Myr, just don't expect it to actually be busted in Standard, because it never has been in the past. We also got some lore rarity stuff, not a whole lot to see here, but stuff you might see for limited, unsubstantiate, kind of fizzled. It's a cool reprint. When it first came out, people were hyped about the card. It has something in the fringiest of plays in formats like Modern, but it really never took off as a spell in any format, but maybe in Standard like Mono Blue Temple. But in general, stuff that you'll see in Limited, but not super duper relevant for Constructed. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily core set 2021 spoilers for today. So what do you think about these new cards? How good is Scavenging Ooze coming back to Standard? What about Hooded Blightfang? Can Deathtouch Tribal be a thing? Animal Sanctuary? Is it better than I'm thinking and hoping? What about Speaker of the Heavens? Is lifegain back? How powerful can that be? All the other cards, Terror of the Peaks, can that show up in Standard, or is it just a good Commander Dragon? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.